Jerry was making cookies for his dad's birthday. The recipe calls for 3 cups of flour, 1½ cups of sugar, and 3/4 cup of chocolate chips. He only wants to make half of the recipe, otherwise that'd be way too many cookies. How much flour, sugar, and chocolate chips does he need?
All right, my job was to figure out what the question is asking us to do. So I kind of reworded the question in my head, and I thought we need half of 3 cups of flour, half of 1½ cups of sugar, and half of 3/4 cups of chocolate chips. And since it was a fraction of an amount, and I know that of means times, that I think we have to multiply 1/2 times each of those 3 numbers.
So what you're saying is of was the clue to show you that it was multiplication.
Yeah.
So you knew that these were all multiplication problems, a fraction multiplying a fraction.
Yes.
So you rewrote it then. You would rewrite it as multiplication instead of of.
Yes. Yeah, I'd write it, but instead of like the of word, I'd put like a time sign.
Okay.
My job was to actually solve the problem, and just like Mr. Vanderhyde, I noticed that it was a multiplication problem because it was half of how many cups. And for the flour, we had 3 cups of flour, and I knew I had to multiply that by half. And since it was a whole number, I put the whole number over 1. So I drew a fraction bar and put 1 underneath. So I had 3 over 1 times 1/2. And I multiplied across and got the fraction 3/2, which is an improper fraction. So I changed it to a mixed number. And I ended up with 1½ cups. So I know that 1½ cups is half of 3 cups. For the sugar, I started with 1½ cups of sugar, and just like with the flour, I multiplied it by a half. And since the 1½ cups is a mixed number, I first changed it into an improper fraction. So I multiplied the denominator times the whole number. 2 times 1 is 2. Then I added the numerator to get 3. That became my new numerator, and the denominator stayed the same at 2. And multiplied it by a half. I multiplied straight across. 3 times 1 is 3. 2 times 2 is 4. And I ended up with 3/4 of a cup. And I didn't need to reduce. And then for the chocolate chips, it was 3/4 of a cup times a half. And I multiplied straight across to get 3/8 cups of chocolate chips.
And I noticed that actually makes sense because all of those answers are less than the starting. And since
Yes.
we're taking half of it.
It should be smaller, than the, yes.
Okay. Of this. So that's a little bit harder for me to think about. So what I did was I started with what my first number was. So when I was talking flour, I did 3 full cups of flour. And then since I was cutting them in half, I actually cut them in half right here and shaded in half of it. And then I kind of made it like an equation and put an equal sign and kind of put those shaded in pieces all together, which would end up equaling 1½ same for the sugar was 1½ only I couldn't start with such nice like 3. I had to start with 1 and then a half, and then I cut those 2 in half again. So from there I could see that I ended up with putting them together, 3/4 of it was shaded in. Okay. And then my chocolate chips, I started with 3/4, so I had to cut each of those fourths in half and then shade in half of that. So then when I put them together, it looks a little bit different, so I end up with 3/8 on that one. So that was how I tried to show it visually, and it's kind of nice because I'm seeing my answers are the same as your answers, so that's a good thing.
So sometimes the visual is really easy to put together, and other times, like with the 3/8,
Yeah.
it's a little bit trickier to see how that comes together.
Yeah. That was definitely a harder one.
I think I agree with your answer. One other way I thought of doing it is taking like my 3 cups for this one,
Mm-hmm.
and then making half of it, just drawing a line down the middle,
Oh,
and then there's 1.5.
I haven't thought of that. That makes sense.